Welcome to the Rooted in Light podcast. I'm Tuesday Rivera. I am your host of this podcast. And for this first podcast, I have invited a very special guest. I have invited my husband and colleague, Gibrán Rivera, to join me today so that as I'm talking a little bit about the podcast and what I'm hoping to launch into the world, I have someone who can ask me questions, can probe a little deeper, can help me share the information that needs to be shared. Welcome, my love. Thank you for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. Super honored. And I just love looking at you. You're so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So this is why, friends, this is why I have him on. Need a little cheerleader, need a little backup. But actually, you feel like a really great person to open this new chapter with me, because I think you have seen me along the way. You've seen me really be in the process of what is it that I want to bring into the world? What do I have to say? What can I contribute? And you've been kind of right alongside me and at my back as I do that. So it feels really good to have you. And just to say to listeners, Gibrán will be a regular guest. So we're hoping to have him on every several podcasts to talk a little bit about his perspective on spiritual work and what I'm doing. And people just, I hope people will enjoy us together. So here we are.
I love being with you. And I'm really excited to be in this conversation. Like you said, I have really witnessed this from its seed form in some ways. I guess, is that accurate to say? I know this has been in your being for all of your life, and I haven't been with you all of your life. But I have witnessed a transformation from strategic, international, consultant, systems change, all of which you still are, into this divine, feminine, rooted in light, magical, holy thing. Being is better than thing, and so I just can't wait to hear what you have to say about it now. But I feel like I have really witnessed not just the inspiration, but the grind of both spiritual and material work that come into showing up here. And it's one of the most beautiful things I got into watching my whole life. I mean that. I'm not just saying that to flatter you. It's a blessing for me.
Thank you. Thank you. And so it feels good to open this up with you and just to say to the viewers, listeners, part of why I'm doing this is because you have held this flag that's you don't just do this work for yourself. You do it for other people, right? You do it with other people. You do it on behalf of other people. And so that I think it has been, all of my professional life, yes, facilitating groups, bringing out strategy, felt on behalf of others. But when it came to my own spiritual journey, it felt quite private. And so in some ways, my mentor talks about coming out of the spiritual closet. So that's a little bit what I'm doing here. I think our friends and family certainly know me in this way. My coaching clients are beginning to know me in this way. I'm convening groups of women. These folks know me in this way, but it really is not always how I've been in the world. And so this is a little bit of a risk for me today, a little bit of a stepping out.
I'm so glad you said it that way, because it's true. You are a very private person, and we are together. And I'm not a very private person, so I really know how private you are. And so, can you share one more word about what moved you to come out of the closet, come out of the spiritual closet? Because that is definitely what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I feel it right now that's what's happening. Well, I think that, as we grow and transform, often there's a choice, right? You can grow and transform within the confines of your current life, and that's beautiful. Or you can grow and transform and kind of build new contours. And that's what it feels like I've been doing in the last several years, is absolutely building a new contour for my life, one that is more focused on personal transformation, one that is more explicitly spiritual, one that is more, I still absolutely care about making change in the world and want us to be better together. I just think my way of supporting people to do it and then my way of doing it is shifting and has shifted pretty significantly. And so it began to feel like a pull, right? To have these practices, to be leading these cohorts and coaching in this way without it being kind of public and out there. And frankly, I think, there's some things to share that I've been doing and discovering. And so that feels in some ways almost like a responsibility.
That's beautiful. I am so glad that you got there. Because it feels that way to me too. I see what you're holding, and it's precious, and I think it's something that is needed. And so that's maybe one of the questions I want to ask you. Given all of that, given this that is moving through you, you've had a podcast before. You have one. I've had a podcast. We've played with the idea of doing a podcast together, but this one is the one that has cohered, the one that is coming into being, and I'm just curious to hear you speak publicly, because we've been like talking about it at home a lot. Yeah. What is this playground? What is this Rooted in Light space?
Great. Thank you. That's a great question, because I have actually been in this question, right? Like, what is it that I have to bring that this is the right format for and the right forum for? And so for me, I love podcasts, right? I listen to several podcasts. That's where I get a lot of my learning. It's where I do a lot of my understanding and deepening of my own spiritual practices or my own like self-discovery practices. I learn from people in this format. And so this is a place, like Rooted in Light is a place where we're going to do kind of three things all of the time, right? One is we're going to move into, I've been calling it self-pursuit. We're going to go in pursuit of ourselves here, right? That is what we're about.
I love that.
Great. So like, we're going to like, if you want to, it's not about doing more, which has been a trap for me in my life. It's actually about becoming more. Like, and it's not, it's like actually moving more deeply into ourselves, like really going after ourselves as something that is worthwhile. We're going to really talk about the divine feminine, because I can no longer kind of pull these things apart. Every day, my day is in consideration to, by the grace of, an attempt to express the divine feminine. Right. And so like, that's going to be here. And I believe for many of us, the pursuit of ourself, at least, I know the pursuit of ourself has a pursuit of our own sacredness. I think for many of us, that's going to include some understanding of the divine feminine, right? And so that's what I want to bring. Like, those two things are really intertwined. And then the third piece is we're going to talk about intuitive practices. We're going to talk about these different ways of knowing and understanding the world. So if I were to do a braid, it's like self-pursuit, divine feminine, intuitive practices. That's what's up for me in the world. And so I want to bring that, and that, not just for me. I'm working with women all the time that this is the braid, right? This is, we're pursuing ourselves. We're finding ourselves as sacred, as both the kind of perceiver of sacred divine feminine and as the object and the subject. Like, we're sacred. We are sacred. And, so, and we have different ways of knowing. Yes. And like, that has to be honored.
Yes.
And actually I would suggest that this time is time for a different way of knowing, that in some ways we've kind of gotten to the edge of like what our brains can handle and process. And so we have to move into different ways of knowing.
This is beautiful. I feel like this is going to be so much fun for you, because this is what you're literally talking about your life. This is what I bear witness to. But even now, even here, as you talk, you said a couple of things that are articulations that I haven't heard in our day-to-day conversations that work for me, that I can apply to my own life, So I can already see how this kind of intention and forum itself is allowing something powerful to happen. I want to say something. I want to ask you something else before getting into each of these things. Not that we can get into each of these things today, but you love podcasts, and you know what else you love? You love opinions. You have very strong opinions. You have a very clear aesthetic. You know what you like and you know what you don't like. I know what you like and I know what you don't like because you let me know. So the reason why I start that question is, as somebody that loves podcasts, as somebody that has opinions about what formats work, including about my own, by the way, which you've shared, what
which I've been on and I love.
what is your? Tell me, like, as you envision, and of course it's gonna evolve.
Yeah.
But like, even for the fun of looking back at the first episode, right? Like, from here, like,
Great.
what is the format that you envision? Like, what can we expect?
Great. Thank you. Also, just, you're busting my chops, but I love your podcast. I listen to every one of your podcasts, by the way. And it is not the podcast I'm trying to do in the world, right? It's different. So what I hope is that a lot of this will be very conversational, right? It'll be a back and forth. I mean, certainly I will interview people and ask about their experiences. I will ask about their own transformations and what there is to learn. But I want it to be a back and forth and almost like you're coming and hanging out. Maybe not so much with like just friends. It's not going to be that casual, but like there's a real comfort here that, there might be a couple F-bombs dropped. We're going to laugh a lot. We're going to talk about
there already has. There's a possibility, right?
There's a possibility of that. So, the idea is that really like you will get, by listening to the podcast, you'll get some good information, right? I do want to share about what I'm learning, right? So when you say I have opinions, I'm going to share some of those opinions, and I'm going to share like what I'm learning about my own practices of devotion or what I've learned about intuition and different practices. There's going to be some content here, like to actually take home with you, but I want it to be with a feeling of conversation that you could, ask me a question. Hopefully you'll think of the question I ask before I ask it, and every time I will ask my guest, and we'll have some recurring guests, but I'll ask them if they have any questions for me too. So that it's definitely a give and take. And then we'll leave every time. I'll leave with an invitation to some kind of practice based on what we've talked about in the day, so that people will leave and have an idea of something they could go do to try it out or to deepen their own kind of self-exploration.
That sounds amazing and beautiful. And you already answered a couple of the questions I had, which was, how will you talk about these intuitive practices? And you said you're going to leave people with the practice. And and I was thinking about, how do you crack the nut of getting, of guests, inviting guests to ask you questions, because I think that's what's going to make it really interesting, and people feel like it's that kind of like a real conversation where we go back and forth.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I think I'll have to warn them, right? Because people get nervous getting on podcasts, but I'm hoping that we'll just begin to actually almost forget the cameras, and that we'll actually just be good people having a good conversation, and that questions might just occur to them, and what they're curious about. And I would assume, we'll have an email for this. It's podcast@tuesdayrivera.com. Like people can write in questions and, like things they want to hear, and we'll make sure we fold those in as well. And like you said, we're experimenting with it, so we'll see, but that's the hope. The hope is that it really moves into conversation space with some good practice, some practical things to take at the end.
Well, you're definitely my favorite person to talk to. So I imagine that you're going to get really cool people that will be delighted to be in conversation with you. Give me a couple of words about Rooted in Light. Like that's the name of the podcast. So that's evocative.
Thank you. How hard was it to get to that name? I just have to tell you, we went through so many names, so many taglines. It was really, really challenging. And one is that I've actually received guidance really clearly. So if we talk about intuitive ways of knowing, I've received very direct guidance that light or illumination or brightness needed to be like what I lead with, that's actually quite important. It's part of who I am. It's part of what I bring. It's part of what was made possible for me in some of my darkest times was this deep knowing of light. And so we knew we needed to lead with that. But in spiritual communities, the seeking of light or the knowing of light can become quite ungrounded. It can become
Yes.
light for light's sake, light as a denial of the dark, or light as it's almost like the same thing we do in many organized religions. If you do it right, you will experience light. And if you don't, then darkness will come. And so I was really concerned that with leading with light, that it would become ungrounded or feel ungrounded to people, or kind of like a happy show. And we want to be happy. I'm a very happy person, but there's something, the motion I always make. And for those of you who are simply listening, you won't be able to see this, but on YouTube you can, it's like in through the chest and down into the body. It's a motion I make a lot in my coaching, a lot in my teaching. Like, this is where we're going. And I would say, we're rooting into ourselves, right?
Yeah.
And so we knew we wanted to be grounded. We talk about being rooted a lot. And of course, rooted into the earth. Like we say that when we're starting our visualizations, let's root down into the earth. And so rooted in light became a way for us to really honor this orientation to light while staying quite grounded and real. And, the soil around roots is quite dark.
Yeah.
Right? There's no denial of light in our roots or in the earth. And it is dark. And so trying to hold both of those pieces in our conversations, in our understanding, in everything we talk about, so that we don't kind of fly off into the ether, is really important.
Oh, thank you for articulating that. I have just a quick thought, and then
Yes, please.
yeah, one is I think is it Richard Feynman, the very charismatic scientist. There's this cool YouTube clip about him talking about what makes up a tree, right? Mm-hmm. And he just talks about the energy of the sun being in that tree, right? So the tree is stored sun energy, right? And it's rooting, but the fact that a tree is stored sun energy really came to me as you were speaking, right? So it's rooting in order to keep that energy. Also,
love that.
Let's find the clip. But I just want to say that the experience of you is you're very much a Taurus, right? And you really are quintessentially, lucky me. But you're very embodied and very grounded and very no nonsense. And I think that's what makes it, that's one of the things that inspires me so much about what you're doing and how you're doing it. Because you're right, there's such a thing with the light discourse or the spiritual discourse that can get really elevated and really airy really, really quickly, right? And I think both of us maybe we share that. We have a reaction to that, right? And there's something, what does it mean to bring it all here? So I just wanted to say that. Well, do you have anything to say about that before I ask you my question?
Well, I just love that you bring it. I love that idea of trees as storing light, and because you don't get more rooted than that, right? Than a tree, right? The strongest winds. And so I'm really appreciating that imagery. And yeah, I think, my sense, and I'm curious if you're finding this with people you are working with too, my sense is that people actually really need that grounding right now. It's so easy to be really blown sideways by the amount of fear in the air, by the amount of anxiety on what we're facing out in the world. And there can be a desire to escape up, right? To transcend, escape up.
That's right.
And it's then that's beautiful. Let me just say, I'm a big fan of transcendence. I just think there's also the immanence that needs to actually be in partnership with that transcendence.
Well, yeah, I think you can only soar from how rooted you are, right?
Yeah.
And that's part of what I feel and sense in you. You've gotten that rooting, which is what allows you to come out and bring this forth in such a powerful way. I think that the word that's coming to me, and I wonder, I don't want to superimpose it on you.
Yeah.
But the word that's coming to me is that this work that you're talking about, that I think I'm talking about in my own way, is that it actually is making a demand of you. Mm-hmm. There's something that it demands of you. I think the first encounter, and there's nothing wrong, it's a first encounter with the light discourse and the spiritual discourse. It is that escapism, that feel good, oh, you are a being of light. You know what I mean? And it's just it's a way out. And what we're talking about is a way in, but that's going to make a demand of you, right? It's, I often talk about my work, like this is grown up stuff, you know? And
Yes.
I'm just curious if that's aligned with what you're talking about.
It is. And I would ask you just in a moment to talk about grown up stuff. I would love to hear your articulation of that. I think that because I think you're right on target. And I want to say that often that first blush of light, that transcendent, really does activate like, oh, I found the way to get out of this mortal coil. You know what I mean? Like I figured out a way. I'm coming, I think, to understand that it may be the way that Goddess and God meets us. Like that's the only way we could accept it. And so like that transcendent piece is like great first. That is actually your way in, even though you think you're getting out. Because as you stay with it, then pretty soon, and you know this, you know, I think you're the one who taught me this, pretty soon that upward motion comes right back down into the body, into the grown-up stuff. But maybe that's the way Goddess has to meet us, or God has to meet us for many of us. And so I'm like, wonderful, and keep going, because there's even more here.
That's
but what would you
beautiful.
say about grown-up stuff? I really, I loved.
I'm glad. I mean, I'm glad to chat about it. But I want to say that that's certainly part of my own journey, right? I received this powerful tantric initiation from an awakened master that changed the course of my life, and I want to say like the first 7 years of that were purely ascendant, right? And like transcendent. And like my heart was just open and like this kind of sweet bliss, you know, and you know, and it was just the beginning, and it was just the beginning. And also, well, I want to stay focused on your podcast.
Okay.
I can briefly, quickly say wisdom. I feel like because I think it's aligned with what we talk about, right? It's like the path of wisdom is a narrow path. It demands a dying to every idea that you have of yourself, right? Literally a dying, right? It's a path of radical honesty, which is never easy, and a path of surrender, of turning it over. All of those things are highly demanding, because the ideas that you hold about who you think you're going to be when is exactly the thing that has to get sacrificed at the altar of the Goddess, right?
I thank you for bringing that. One of the so let me like speak to that demand, because I think you asked me to speak to that demand. I think that there is always a demand for a deeper, richer, wiser, more sacred life, right? If that, you know, like it's just like I could be really glib and say if that was easy, everyone would do it, right? But not everyone like chooses that, because it does have a demand. It has a demand of devotion. It has a demand of real self-reflection, right? Of like peeking into the shadows of yourself and saying like, what's there too? Oh, I showed up this way. It has a demand that, you know, for both of us, and I know that I'll talk about this more on the podcast as we go, but for both of us, truly turning toward a path of a spiritual, sacred, aligned life that was guided by the divine meant both of us have blown up our lives in certain ways, right? You more than once, but like I've been blowing up my life, right? Like, and in some ways, this could be considered blowing up my life. I will, you know, I'll keep the strategic work. That's not going away. But like in some ways, like setting this course and like coming out in this way is in some ways a demand. It would be easier for me to be quiet about it and just kind of do it off the side and just with people I like. And so there's that piece of the demand. And then the other thing I want to say that we'll really work with on this podcast and in all of my work is the belief that the wound is the portal, that it is actually through our very hardest experiences that we are actually able to know our truest selves, our deepest selves, our sacred selves, and reach the most light. And so if the wound is the portal, then we don't turn away from any wound. We don't say, no, we don't say that can't be. We don't say denial or rejection. We actually turn to face the wound and say, what is here for me? And that is a really important part of my work and the work we'll be bringing here. The wound is the portal. We don't get around it. We don't deny it, and we don't thug it out. We turn around and we face it.
Ashe, Ashe. And that is certainly one of the things that inspires me the most about you, and that actually I carry with me in my own healing work with others. Like
Mm.
the way in which you hold that to be true, in which you keep turning towards the woundless portal, and the way in which have seen you churn with it and like struggle with it and suffer through it all the way until I see, and every time seeing more and more liberation. That is like that's like a major mark in my own consciousness when I'm holding
Mm.
other people, because you are
Mm.
such a potent exemplar of that. And
Mm.
I just wanted to say that aloud again and to say it here as you launched your podcast, because it seems like quite a radical truth. I feel like so much of what we're experiencing right now in the world is like what I call it, the politics of resentment. And
Mm.
that resentment really is resentment against life's terms. And life's terms
Right.
is like this terrible unfairness and the horrors that so many of us have to endure. Right? And to like say, well, this has been my lot. Not to like accept it with your head, but to like, how will you work with what actually is and what has like already actually happened, because it cannot be undone. I think that's radical. I think that's radical and really powerful.
It feels radical. Thank you for seeing it. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for being and partnering with me as I turn towards it. Because, of course, the other thing to say about all of this, part of the reason of the podcast, part of the reason I'm convening cohorts is like, it's better to do it together. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
just so much easier to do it together and to be accompanied and to accompany each other into our wounds. Of course, like in some ways we're alone in them. And we got to take that last step over across the threshold. But it is so much better to do it together and to do it with people who have some experience in it and have done it before. And I very much believe, and like I'm 50 now. And so, of course, this has been an ongoing understanding life on life's terms, life on life's terms, life on life's terms. And I, get closer to the centrality of that truth the older I get. But that's all we got. That's all we got. And so let's be together and be with life on life's terms and know that 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 life gives as much as it takes, and so we don't
Yeah, yeah,
we don't have
yeah,
to be
yeah,
afraid to go to
yeah.
those dark places. And in fact, it's actually what makes a life good.
Yeah. What a radical thing for you to say, given what I know about your life experience. It's really
Mm.
beautiful.
Thank you.
It literally informs what I do. It really is meaningful. As we start to maybe turn towards a close here, this is the introduction to your podcast. That's what we're doing, right?
Aha. Yeah.
So, is there anything else that people should know about what you're up to here, what your intention is?
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I think that a couple of things that I want to say. One is that we talked about the pursuit of self. I think kind of like the next like little piece of that is the expression of self, right? So it's not
Ashe.
just kind of self-knowledge, but like expression. And what will that look? I'm really interested in helping people in really figuring out what is their self-expression like in any given moment. And I want to make room for, one of the things that's really important to me is that self-expression can be kind of weird or not traditional or fun or delightful or quirky or, that really we're all such like quirky little people, right? And I want to make room for that self-expression to have like a full range of creative genius and dance and poetry and music and also just like the little strange things about you. You feel comfortable like bringing out, because like you feel good about who you are. And so there's like this element of self-expression and radical self-expression that really appeals to me, and I hope to make room for it. And the other is like and I think I think that it's been evident here. But we've talked a lot about the roots and the dark and turning towards the wound. And all of that is true. And maybe because maybe it's because I worked with battered women and rape survivors for many years. I actually, and in my own personal history, which I'm sure, we'll share that story at some point in the podcast, but my actual lived experience is that those rooms, my own experience of healing has like released and had huge amounts of joy and humor and grace and sometimes even bliss in the healing of it. And so there's something for me that like I'm like, yeah, we were going to go deep, but I want us to have a good time. And I don't actually, somehow I feel like many, many times it's like you have to choose one or the other. And I'm like, oh, no. We got to do both. We have to do both. And I actually know that there can be both. In my own body, I know that there can be both. And in my experience working with survivors of different types of violence, I know that there can be both. And I actually think that that's the next place we're going. It was almost like we needed to have a reckoning with how bad it is, life on life's terms, and how good it is, life on life's terms.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Yeah, I feel like what you're talking about, this pursuit of self, I feel like it inevitably leads to self-expression, right? Because once you touch the nature of the goddess, all she does is unfold and create, right? And so
that's right.
It just feels like it's what it yields into, It feels that way. And I just want to say a couple of quick things here. On the quirks, you're definitely acing that. So, once again, another way of living into your integrity. and also, you are a good time. You and I laugh all day,
all the time,
every day. You and I laugh about the worst things that have happened in our lives, the worst things that happen between us, the worst thing. We are always enjoying it. And it just like, your laughter has delighted me from the very first time I heard it, when I had no idea that I was going to fall madly in love. Turned around and completely spit back out in a way I never imagined. So you are a delight, and you are joyful. And I don't know that it's possible to hang out with you virtually or otherwise and not sense that.
Thank you. Well, I hope so, because that's also what I'm here to do. Is just like, the goddess I'm devoted to is like, her name is the player of the blissful game. Right. And so like, that's it. And we, almost opened up about desire, but we're not going to go there. But yes, I hope on this podcast we have a good time, and that it's a well that you come to feel good, deepened, but also lightened.
Well, we might not be going there to the desire thing, but I'm already there.
Oh, thank you so much. And we're going to go into desire for sure. We have some podcast plan where we talk about eros. So like, that's the thing. Some of this is going to be a little edgy, right? If you came to my class, I say things like you have to be ready to suspend your ways of understanding. You have to be willing to like take a risk into thinking, feeling, imagining something different. And it's no different with this podcast. It's just the ask is that you try it out, that you come along, that you see what's there.
I'm already a fan. I can't wait to see what comes out of it. This is beautiful. Thank you for inviting me to the first one. This is awesome.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this with me, love. I really appreciate it. And I can't wait to have you on because we're going to talk a little bit about you here at some point and the divine masculine. So stay tuned for that. The podcast will have guests, co-conversationalists with me every week. And we come every other week. We come out on Tuesdays. So hope to see folks then. If you like this, share it with somebody. Thanks so much.